In 54 years of existence and 3 NBA Finals appearances, the most recent being just 2 years ago, the Phoenix Suns have never won an NBA championship. Could this finally be the year that they get over the hump, even though the team looks much different than it did just a couple years ago? The player that led them to the finals in Chris Paul is no longer there, and the best player on their team at that point, in Devin Booker, isn't even the best player on their team anymore. Can this team finally reach the pinnacle and do what the Denver Nuggets just did this last season and win their first NBA championship?
That won't go. Tucker the rebound, and that'll do it. It's over. The Bucks have done it. The long wait has ended. After a half century, the Milwaukee Bucks are NBA champions once again.
That was one of the best performances I've ever seen now.
Dallas 123-90.
And it wasn't that close.
No. Second chance points in that game. 23-0 Dallas over Phoenix. So the Suns 64-18, but their season ends in the conference semifinals.
Breaking news into HQ in a mammoth trade from the NBA before the deadline. It's Kevin Durant heading out of Brooklyn. Durant dealt to the Phoenix Suns just days after the Nets dealt Kyrie Irving. The Suns acquiring Durant for a bounty. 4 first-round picks, a 28-pick swap, as well as players like Mikal Bridges, Cam Johnson, and Jay Crowder. TJ Warren goes the other way. So the Suns have a roster that now includes Devin Booker, Kevin Durant, CP3, and DeAndre Ayton in that starting lineup. But they give up a lot to get him.
Thorough domination in the first 24 minutes, a 30-point lead for the Nuggets on the road as the Suns are rapidly setting in the West. Jalen Rose, I'm Mike Greenberg. Here's Stephen A. What do we say about Kevin Durant and the Phoenix Suns?
What I will tell you, depending on what region that you're in the country, if you're in New York City, it's probably the Honeymooners. If you're someplace else, it's a comedy show. The Phoenix Suns might as well forfeit this game and just go home and watch it and tell everybody to do the same. That's the most entertainment they're going to get in that arena tonight. This is over. It's embarrassing. I forgot DeAndre Ayton was going to be injured, but the bottom line is, wouldn't have made much of a difference. Props to you. An absolutely pathetic, awful performance. They're outclassed. They're outmanned. They're out-physical. They're out-game plan. They just don't have anything going for them right now. And all we could do, looking at this Phoenix Suns, the second consecutive time, last year in the closeout game, they were down 30 to Dallas at the half. Today, they're about to go home for the season, down 30 at the half, both times on their home court. It's bad, man. And I mean, listen, they just going to have changes next season.
Breaking news into CBS Sports HQ. The Phoenix Suns have fired head coach Monty Williams. Our NBA insider Bill Reiner confirming postseason expectations were high for Phoenix after acquiring KD Kevin Durant from the Brooklyn Nets mid-season. But after getting eliminated in the second round by the Nuggets, new old governor Matt Ishbia decided to make a change. Williams leaves after 4 seasons with the Suns.
The Suns, as we speak, are finalizing a trade for all-star guard Bradley Beal. The Wizards are expected to receive Chris Paul and Landry Shamet and several second-round picks. Beal is coming off averaging just over 23 points per game last season. He has been a long-time scoring machine. Injuries, however, have been a question mark. It remains to be seen, meanwhile, what the Suns' bench depth is going to look like. But they've got these 3 guys, and that clearly is what the ownership wanted.
Huge news out of Portland and Milwaukee. Damian Lillard is joining Giannis and headed to the Bucks. Woj tweeting, Lillard goes to Milwaukee as part of a 3-team deal. Drew Holiday, DeAndre Ayton going in a first-round pick. Swap pick rights 28 and 30 to the Blazers. Phoenix lands Nurkic, Grayson Allen, Nasir Little, and Keon Johnson.
Year 1 with the Los Angeles Lakers, you come in, you win a championship. And now once again, you are on a team where the talent is sky high and the expectations are as well. What are you going to take from that experience and apply here?
Well, just belief that it can be done. You know, obviously, when you're playing against teams like the Denver Nuggets that have continuity on their side, there's a little bit of a disadvantage there. But we know that from my direct experience that you can galvanize a group in year 1 and go all the way to the promised land and win a championship. And, you know, that's going to be our aspirations here. We believe it can be done, and but we want to hit the ground running.
Yo, what is up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of NBA Now. It's your boy Dom, and we're going to jump right into things here today. Now, today we are going to be talking about none other than the Phoenix Suns. Now, this team might have the most polarity of all the contenders across the entire league. Obviously, we know the top end talent on this team with Kevin Durant, Bradley Beal, Devin Booker, etc. But we also understand the depth issues this team might face and how, in some matchups, this team might be a first round exit in the NBA playoffs. Now, that's hard to say when you have a team with Kevin Durant, Devin Booker, and Bradley Beal, and potentially a team that could field an MVP this season. But we're going to jump into all of that here. And first, I want to start off by looking at the Ayton trade. Obviously, it's what kind of the most recent big event for this team was. So everybody obviously is going to look at this as the Damian Lillard trade, but Ayton gets thrown in, goes to Portland, and what we see is Phoenix is able to bring back Yusuf Nurkic, Grayson Allen, Nazir Little, and Keon Johnson. Now, we'll dive into those players here in a minute. I do think it was an interesting trade from the Suns' perspective, though, as obviously we knew that the relationship between Ayton and the Suns wasn't really there anymore. Clearly, Ayton wanted his career to be going in a different direction than the Suns did, and even last season we saw the Suns catering more towards bigs like Bismack Biyombo and such, and a big part of that was Chris Paul was able to make those players just as good as Ayton for what the Suns were using them for. Obviously, Ayton has more potential defensively, offensively, all that. We know he was a first overall pick in the NBA draft, and that was for a reason. But they move on from him. They bring in Yusuf Nurkic to kind of replace that. And I think for what this team's going to want, he'll do a lot of that. Now, again, like I said, we'll dive more into the pieces that they got around the big three here in a second. But when you're looking at this team, you have to think big three. Now, there have been tons of big threes to be assembled in the past 10 years. It's seemingly been the trend of the NBA ever since LeBron James went and joined Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh in Miami all those years ago at this point, almost or over a decade ago at this point. And so for the past decade, it's been all about big threes. It's been a couple years since we've truly seen one succeed, and we're going to kind of look at that here in a second. But let's look at the big three that this team is made up of. Obviously, Kevin Durant, we know who he is. Come on, man. He's Kevin Durant. You know who he is. No, but yeah, Kevin Durant, obviously, I think is the best player on this team. Now, I do think the team is going to kind of be looked at as Devin Booker's team, and a large part of that is he's been there for so long. I mean, when you think about Devin Booker, you think all the way back to him dropping 70 points on the Celtics in like his second year, which at this point was like 10 years ago. He's been in the league for 8 years. He's played for the Suns for 8 years. He's made the finals with the team. He is the Phoenix Suns, but I do think Kevin Durant is a better player, and I think we'll continue to see that this season. This might be a crazy prediction to make, but if Kevin Durant were ever to win another MVP, it would be this year. It would be in year 15 with the big three. If they were able to go on a run, win enough games throughout the regular season, and he's just dominating at the level that we know he can, I think he's going to have to buy in a little bit more defensively due to some of the pieces on this team defensively not necessarily being there. If he can stay healthy, this could be his best season of his career. He has not shown any sign of declining the last few years. I think health has really been the only concern ever since he tore his Achilles back in 2019. And I think he's going to continue to be very good for this team, obviously, this year. Now, the last time he won an MVP was quite a long time ago. It was 2013, 2014. This would be a decade later if he did win the MVP. Now, it's a little bit of a bold claim, and I wouldn't put him as my favorite, but I do think there's a very good chance that we see Kevin Durant at age 35 finish in the top 5 for MVP if this team can be as good as a lot of people are thinking they can be. I'm a little bit skeptical on that, though. I'm a little bit skeptical on this team. I've seen a lot of people putting the Suns as a top 2 seed, even the 1 seed, and I think that's very contradictory to saying that they have bad depth. I don't think you can call a team a number 1 seed and then say that they have bad depth, because I think when you think about teams winning tons of regular season games, obviously your prime example would be your 73-9 Warriors before they got Kevin Durant. And the biggest thing everybody says when looking back on that team is, wow, this team had a ton of depth. You had Sean Livingston coming off the bench. You had like 12 players that they could play throughout the regular season. You had Steph Curry sitting out in the fourth quarter because the team was so good and they extended the lead. Like, you never think about that 73-9 Warriors team and say, oh yeah, it was just Steph, Clay, and Draymond, and that they just carried it all the way. Obviously, they were the main components, and that's a huge reason why they went to the NBA Finals, why Steph was the MVP, and all that stuff. But a big component of that was their depth, and I don't think this Suns team necessarily has that, even though I think they had a better free agency than maybe some people are giving them credit for, or than we would have thought they would have had going into free agency. Next to Kevin Durant, the second best player on this team is obviously Devin Booker. I could see him leading this team in assists. We've seen him play point guard before. I do think they're going to look to put Bradley Beal as the point guard for this team. I think Devin Booker's probably the best playmaker you have on this team. He's averaged almost 7 assists before in his career, and I could see him averaging a career high this year in assists. Now, obviously, last year, when you looked at this team in the playoffs, especially as a Denver Nuggets fan, it was stop Kevin Durant, stop Devin Booker. Now they've added Bradley Beal to that mix, who I think is only going to relieve pressure from those two guys. As for Devin Booker, he's about to be 27 years old to start the season, so happy early birthday to Devin Booker. Yeah, I think he's going to continue to do his thing, be a top 5 shooting guard in the league. I do think he's a little bit overrated, and I don't think he's the best player on this team, even though I think it's going to be looked at as his team. But yeah, I think Devin Booker is going to be an absolute monster for this team and continue to be one of the best players in the league. And really, it's him and Kevin Durant's team, with Bradley Beal being the third guy. Now, Bradley Beal being a third guy is kind of insane. This is a guy that's led the league in scoring before. He's a multiple-time All-Star. He has continued to try to compete throughout his career, even though the Wizards have been pretty bad ever since early John Wall days. But he's over 30 at this point. He obviously wants to win. You didn't have to trade a ton for him. And, I mean, obviously, Chris Paul ended up being moved and all that and stuff like that. At this point, you traded a 37-year-old Chris Paul for a guy that can average 30 points for you. Do I think Bradley Beal is the 30-point scorer he was 2 years ago? Maybe. We'll see. Obviously, next to the two guys, he's probably not going to do that. If I had to throw out averages for these guys, I'd say Kevin Durant's going to hold about 28, 29. Devin Booker is going to be a little less at 25, 26. And then Bradley Beal will be the guy floating around 20, because typically you kind of see that third guy, the last 2 seasons, Bradley Beal's averaged 23 points per game for reference, but typically when you kind of assemble these big threes, you see that third guy take a big hit. Chris Bosh was the one to do it in Miami with LeBron, and then Kevin Love had that same thing happen to him in Cleveland with LeBron. So if anybody on this team is going to see that happen, I think it would be Bradley Beal. I'd expect him to be around 19 to 20 points per game. But I have seen him come out and say he wants to buy in defensively. He wants this to be his best defensive year. And that could be huge for this team, because although he's not the biggest guard, he's not the most imposing guard, he's still 6'4", 207 pounds. And if he can get some steals and put in the effort defensively, this team is going to need these 3 guys to do that. And though I think, Bradley Beal and Devin Booker can be capable defenders, I think Kevin Durant is the best of the 3, especially as a help defender. But I do think that Bradley Beal is going to be kind of the odd man out of the big 3 here. I think will be a good piece for them, but I don't know if he's going to be the playmaker that I think the Suns are hoping that he'll be. Now, in his career, he's never averaged above 6.5 assists. Now, the last 2 years have been 2 of his better playmaking years, a lot of that being with the Wizards kind of devoid of talent. The ball's in his hand more often, and he's not trying to average 30 on a team that wins less than 30 games. It's just that simple, right? Now, his replacement at this point in Jordan Poole is probably going to do that. He's probably going to average more points than they score per game. Or not. He's going to average more points per game than wins that the Wizards have throughout the regular season, which is something that Bradley Beal has pretty much done for the last few years there. And so that'll be interesting to see. But as for the Suns, I think he's going to be very good for them. And then you get to the rest of the roster. The rest of the roster is interesting. Now, in watching Summer League, I actually really liked how Saben Lee was playing. He's only on a 2-way, so that's kind of all the mention he's going to get unless he were to get brought up to a full-time point guard for them. Other than that, the only other point guard on the roster is Jordan Goodwin, who's not exactly fantastic. So again, that's why I look at Devin Booker as a big-time playmaker for him. Bradley Beal will average about 5 assists. Kevin Durant will average about 5 assists. And it's kind of going to be by committee with this team, as not having that true offensive playmaker and, pace setter that they had in years past with Chris Paul is going to be a huge shakeup for this team. Speaking of huge shakeups for this team, pretty much the whole roster has been revamped. Josh Okogie returns from last year. Damian Lee returns from last year. But in free agency, we saw them go out and get Eric Gordon, who I think was a very good signing. Potentially their best signing of free agency. If it wasn't him, it was probably Drew Eubanks, who at the time it looked like could potentially move into a starting center role if they didn't like how Ayton was playing. Now, obviously, they trade for Nurkic, who I think will start for them, and they kind of bring that Portland center duo here to Phoenix to try to help this team win. They also signed bates-diop, who had a good year last year for the Spurs, and I know a lot of people are high on his ability to be a defensive guy and a three-point shooter and stuff like that. So we'll see if he's able to continue that here in his 6th season in the league. They also, speaking of three-point shooting, bring in Yuta Watanabe, who was one of the best three-point shooters in the league last year. Brooklyn lets him go, and it seems to be a diamond in the rough that the Suns are able to go out and get him. He's a guy that can shoot it from range, spot up, and is going to fit perfectly alongside these guys, especially if he can buy in on the defensive end. And that's those two big guys where bates-diop and Yuta Watanabe, you really want them to buy in on the defensive end, because when you're looking at a guy like Josh Okogie or in a guy like Nazir Little, who they bring over in the trade from Portland, you're looking at two guys that are very much defensively focused. And although they could be two of the best wing stoppers in the league last year, we saw how detrimental it was to this offense in the playoffs last season when they had to play Josh Okogie and they didn't have that luxury of having a guy that was able to shoot and play defense. They kind of had to pick and choose. And I think that hurt them a lot in the playoffs last year, because it kind of came down to, okay, are we playing Josh Okogie to try to stop Jamal Murray, or are we just going to play Landry Shamet and put him in the corner so that when Kevin Durant and Devin Booker are getting double teamed or shut down by Aaron Gordon, we're able to kick it out to an open shooter. Speaking of open shooters, they bring in Grayson Allen, who I think is probably going to be the best three-point shooter on this team for them. He'll be able to play decent defensively, and I think is probably going to be the most underrated pickup from that Ayton trade for them. Obviously, the biggest piece was Nurkic, who's going to start at them for center, and isn't the defensive center that he was in years past before he broke his leg and stuff like that, but will be serviceable on that end. And if you do need to really get in a defensive lineup, I think they'll put in Eubanks, who, kind of under the radar is one of the better shot blockers, especially as a backup big in the NBA. He's only 6'9", but he's made kind of a role and carved out a piece for himself in the NBA as a defensive big off the bench. So I do think he'll kind of cover some of that slack that Nurkic may have at this point in his career. But I think Nurkic is going to be a great screener role big with all three of these guys. He's able to play make a little bit if you need from him, and he can kind of get in the paint, get his buckets, and do exactly what this team's going to need from a starting center. But Grayson Allen coming in from that trade is going to be huge for them, because, like I said, big thing here with this team is you've got that top-end talent, but to win regular season games, you're going to need bench production, you're going to need shooting, and you're going to need defense. And I think all those is something that Grayson Allen brings to this team, even though I'm pretty sure none of us like Grayson Allen. Even Duke fans like myself, at this point, he has the reputation of being the dirty player that he is. But again, he's going to be effective, and he's going to help this team a ton, I think, especially if you're looking to try to, go throughout the playoffs. We saw what he was able to do for the Milwaukee Bucks and help them win a championship, and I think Phoenix is hoping that he can do that here. That's kind of your role players. You do have Bol, who, I guess thought he was, or we all thought might have been, the Victor Wembanyama or Chet Holmgren before those two got to the league. He hasn't quite been able to show that. It seems like he fell in the draft for a reason. We were all surprised when he fell in the draft. He was projected to go top 10, goes in the second round. We pick him up as the Nuggets. We hardly play him. He ends up leaving here, goes to Orlando, plays okay, and now he is struggling to even get preseason minutes for this Phoenix Suns team, who has been resting some of their stars because of obviously how much they're going to play throughout the regular season. So it just seems like Bobo's career is kind of at a standstill at this point. He's going to continue to get a job as a 7'3" guy that can shoot occasionally and play defense. But I do think we have to kind of slow down the Bobo train. And although it would be great for this team if he's able to break out, it just seems unlikely that that'll happen. But that's really the bulk of the rest of your roster. And that brings you to all the way back to where we started with the big three. Now, how likely is it that this big three is successful and able to go on far in the playoffs, win games throughout the regular season, and actually compete for an NBA championship?
Well, let's look at some recent big threes and see how they panned out.
In 2021, where obviously you have the infamous foot on the line situation with Kevin Durant, they play Milwaukee, they go to Game 7, they lose, they were injury-riddled. Kyrie, Harden were both out. It was Kevin Durant trying to carry the team on his back, go all the way. They lose the last two games of the series to Milwaukee. Milwaukee goes on to win the NBA championship, and we never see more success than a second-round exit by the Brooklyn Nets big three. Then the next team you would look at would be Russell Westbrook. He teams up with LeBron James and Anthony Davis in Los Angeles. And what do? Well, his first season there, they win 39% of their games. His second season, they win 48% of his games. And he gets shipped out the door at the trade deadline. and then goes on to play much better once he gets to the Clippers. But as for how it worked in LA, didn't work at all. And even when he got to the Clippers, they couldn't beat this Suns team. Now, they also dealt with injuries, and that's been a big theme of recent big threes. But we could look at another team with Russell Westbrook. We could go all the way back to OKC when Carmelo Anthony gets traded from the New York Knicks to team up with Paul George and Russell Westbrook in OKC. What do? They lose in the first round to Donovan Mitchell, and kind of an embarrassing fashion in which they kind of got walked off the court by Joe Ingles. It was probably the lowest point for most of these players as it goes for public perception, especially when you look at a guy like Carmelo Anthony or a guy like Paul George, who were dealing with, believing that they were one of the better players in the league still. Carmelo said that he didn't want to come off the bench and all that infamously that year, and they get outplayed by Joe Ingles and first round exited by a very, very young Donovan Mitchell. I think he was a rookie that year. So obviously big threes have struggled recently, but you can also look on the opposite end and you can look at LeBron James, Dwayne Wade, and Chris Bosh that won multiple championships. You can look at Steph Curry, KD, and whoever you want to say is the third, whether it be Clay or Draymond. That was really a big four, but they also went on to win multiple championships. Or you could look at, the Cavs big three that also won a championship in 2016 with LeBron, Kyrie, and Kevin Love. So big threes have almost as much success as they do failures. For every team, just like the Russell Westbrook Lakers, there's a team like the LeBron James Heat that you can look at and find success or find failure in the big threes. A lot of that comes down to how well does this team fit together, how well do the connected pieces fit together, and do the sparks align at the right time? Because I think the main thing when you want to talk about the sparks aligning at the right time is, well, let's look at the Cavs, right? They come back from 3-1. Obviously, Draymond has a situation in which he puts himself out for a game, and it allows this team to build momentum. The year before, they were injured in the playoffs, and it was really LeBron James versus the Warriors by himself, right? But you can also look on the opposite end, and you can look at the Warriors versus the Raptors, who still have that big four intact, and injuries again are what took them down against Kawhi Leonard and the Raptors. So health is the biggest thing that's going to play a factor here. As Kevin Durant and Bradley Beal have continued to get older, they've continued to play less games, and so a lot is going to be on the shoulders for Devin Booker in the playoffs, and if these guys aren't healthy, they're not going to go far in the playoffs. That's not necessarily where the biggest thing is that they need to worry about right now. Right now, they need to worry about making the playoffs. The West is a very, very deep conference. I think the Suns will be in the playoffs. I'm not making the prediction that they won't. But you want home court advantage, especially if there's a potential health concern, because like we said, this team isn't the deepest team. You're kind of fighting for pieces. Do you want the defensive big? Do you want the guy that can play a little bit better on offense? Do you want the guy that can shoot, or do you want the defender? And you kind of have to pick and choose with your lineups. And so that's going to be a big thing throughout the regular season. So when there's teams like the Denver Nuggets, like the Sacramento Kings, the Clippers, the Warriors, the Lakers, the Timberwolves, the Pelicans, the Thunder, the Mavericks, and the Grizzlies that could all be playoff teams, and that's not even to mention a team like the Utah Jazz that was only a couple games out last year. And although they got worse after trading Mike Conley, they brought in some new young players and look to continue to try to win. The Portland Trail Blazers, who obviously just drafted Scoot Henderson and bring in DeAndre Ayton and have revamped their roster. The Houston Rockets spent the most money in all of free agency, bringing in tons of veterans to try to win games. And the San Antonio Spurs, who just got Victor Wembanyama, obviously don't want to be the worst team in the league as well this year. So the entirety of the Western Conference is going to be a bloodbath night in and night out. Some team of those first 11 teams that I named has to miss a playoffs. I don't think it'll be the Phoenix Suns, but I disagree with the fact that they're going to be a 1 seed or they're going to be a 2 seed. I'd put them around the 4 to 6 seed. They're going to stay out of the play-in because they're good enough to win those few games to keep them above the play-in. Or if they somehow ended up in the play-in, they'd make the playoffs. In a 1-game elimination scenario, if there's anybody in the league that I don't want to play, it's Kevin Durant, Devin Booker, and Bradley Beal, because I can guarantee that one of them is going for 35 in a single-game elimination. And that scares the shit out of me because I don't know which one it's going to be, and somebody else is probably going to pop off if I decide to guard the wrong player. That's just ultimately how it is when you play against that much talent. Again, I think the Suns will be a 4 to 6 seed. I think if they are able to be a 1 or 2 seed, like a lot of people are saying, expect Kevin Durant or Devin Booker to climb into MVP conversations. But this team is all going to be about playoff success. Regular season success is not really where they're going to measure how well they are as we look at big threes of the past. We just talked about all these other teams losing in the playoffs or, having to make moves before the playoffs to break up the big three. But the teams that were successful, that went on to be historic big threes, they won championships, and most of them won multiple championships. So if the Phoenix Suns want to cement themselves as one of the best big threes of all time, they got to go out and they got to win the championship. I don't think they're going to do it, but I do think they're going to be a big contender. Expect to see them in the second round. And if you're a Western Conference playoff team, obviously you don't want to play a lot of these teams, but the Phoenix Suns might be the most scary team to play against in the playoffs. With all that said, I appreciate you guys watching. Make sure you guys drop a like and subscribe for more. And let me know, where do you think the Suns are going to finish this year? Who do you think is going to be the best player on the team? And do you think anybody in this team is going to climb into MVP conversations? Or is this team going to burn up in flames in front of our faces and be one of the biggest what ifs I've ever seen? With all that said, I'll catch y'all next time. Peace out, guys.
Kevin Durant. You know who I am. Y'all know who I am.